I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Christopher Russell, a psychoanalyst in Chelsea, Manhattan, and host on the podcast New Books in Psychoanalysis. You may have noticed that Rendering Unconscious podcast has expanded in recent weeks. Rendering Unconscious podcast, 23rd Mind TV, Radio Mega Golem, and the label HIGHBROW LOWLIFE are all on the same stream. When I started the podcast, I kind of hijacked my husband's label SoundCloud and used it as the podcast SoundCloud. Last week, when he decided to start a sort of radio show of his own, we decided to have them all be in the same place. So now, Radio Mega Golem has joined Rendering Unconscious podcast and 23rd Mind TV in the HIGHBROW LOWLIFE stream. Enjoy! Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. Available from Trapart Books, 2019. Please visit our publisher's website, www.trapart.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode.
Here in New York with COVID-19 and not being able to see. I work over the phone. I can't stand it.
Yeah.
I work.
Are most of your clients face to face or on the couch?
All on the couch. All on the couch. So in a sense, nothing has changed for them. And in fact, I have several that, announce that they're on the couch in their apartments, so they're trying to maintain it, and I'm, in a chair. I'm not in the office, and they don't seem to mind it, but I can't stand it. Can't stand working over the phone.
Yeah. What do you feel like feels different?
There's always, even as an analysan, there's something about going to a space that is set up just for that. And I could go down to the office, but I'm in a shared office and everybody's just saying, isolate, don't go to these spaces as much as you can. Although I did for 2 weeks work in the office. So there's something about saying this space, this physical space we're using for this, for the treatment. But then also, I think that you pick up more. I mean, listening, observing. I think there's evenly hovering observation as much as there is evenly hovering, listening.
Yeah, people move their legs or their arms or do different gestures or it's all very telling, even when they're on the couch and not looking at you.
Absolutely. Especially, certain cases that are very aware of their own bodies, at least to talk about, and when what they're saying does not match up with what their body is doing. It's extremely, extremely helpful to share a space. I'm thinking of what's the book? Oh, The Empty Space, the theater book where he talks. Peter Brook. I was going to lose the name, and he talks about, and here he's talking about the theater, but members of the same species in the same room together, to tell stories. He's talking about live theater. So I think it's to me it's important and a preferred way of working. And yet I'm certainly grateful that we can work over the phone, because I come out of the restaurant world. It's funny. A friend of mine just opened a restaurant in Stockholm. I come out of the restaurant world, and it's gone right now. All my colleagues, all my friends. I mean, it's gone. They've been shuttered, and there is no, bailout yet. So I'm very fortunate that this work, allows us to continue on the phone.
It's a really good point, because a lot of small businesses or independent businesses are gonna end up really hurt and unfortunately closing.
Yeah, it's there's, like I said, I'll just stick with the restaurant because that's what I know. But there are almost every restaurant has had to set up their own independent GoFundMe page, and there's work get something collectively done. But I know that the celebrity chef Tom Colicchio went on CNN last week and said we need this, requires federal help. So, we'll see. We'll see.
How did you go from restaurants to analysis?
That's a very good question. Well, in certain cases, they're all about feeding.
Nourishment.
Nourishment. Well, I got to tell you, read Melanie Klein, and that makes so much sense. So much sense. Yes, there's elements of nourishment, of course, and then intimacy. A chef that I worked with in New York, really, really brilliant guy, and he said, he considers, being a chef a creative, artistic pursuit, and he said, and of the arts, he says, I consider mine to be the most intimate because I make something that you put inside of you. It could nourish you or it could kill you.
And it becomes you.
And it becomes you, yeah, exactly. And you have to do it at least every week, if not every day. It doesn't, so I really, it's funny, my wife, was an actor and had to wait tables and despised it. I loved it. I absolutely loved being tableside. I liked nourishing. I liked feeding people. But over time, in a lot of relationships that I formed with guests and friends, it's like, why do we have to have this menu between us? Why can't it just be the two of us? And so I, and through a different path, I found psychoanalytic writing. I found, of course, analyst, and I thought I just want the meeting with another human being to be about that. No pretense of food or anything else. And that's, and then I went to a group conference in 2000. It doesn't matter. I went to a group conference. A group analyst in New York held a summer conference at his home in Bar Harbor, and I went. And it was primarily, analysts. There was a few of us who were patients, but not analysts. But it was, all grist for the mill. Everybody could come. And I had been considering training and whatever. And what was really fascinating is in that group, it was a big group, like 30 people, to an analyst, they all said, come on in, the water's fine. Not that it's easy, of course, it's not easy work, not that they didn't have struggles, it's the most human profession, but as a profession, it was come on in, the water's fine. And in my life, that was the first time that had ever happened. Talking to any other profession, friends of mine who were, super successful attorneys, are like, oh God, if you can do anything else, don't be an attorney. You be a restaurateur if you can do anything else. So people that had professions that they loved generally warned people against it. And this was the first time this group of people said, this is great. And I knew it. I mean, you sort of know it before you know it. And I began training.
Yeah, I love it. I waited tables and tended bar for a long time too, like all before college, all through grad school. And I've often joked that it's really similar, like especially tending bar. You're kind of a therapist, and I used to joke that I should have just stayed tending bar because I made more money. But I worked on South Beach, so.
Well, I mean, I also know I was very fortunate to be doing it. I'm originally from D.C., but most of my life has been spent in New York, and to wait tables, bartend in New York is it's a whole other level of income, and also respect and professionalism, and it really allowed me a lot. But there's in the very beginning of Thelma and Louise, when they're, after they've killed, I think his name is Harlan or whatever, and the cop says, "How'd you know he was a bad dude?" And she goes, "I'm a waitress. If I can't spot, if I can't read people, then I have no business being a waitress." And I'm like, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's really, I think there's a lot of parallels feeding. And in fact, at one point when I was, in training, one of the professors asked, which I thought was very typical of any university of any stripe, sort of a self-answering question, like, "Oh, is your analytic training helping you in your restaurant work?" And of course, yes, analytic training just helps in all lives. And I, of course, had to be oppositional and said, "Listen, being a waiter has helped me be an analyst, in a sense, even more."
Yeah, I loved it too.
Yeah, really, really amazing. So that's really what I'm watching. And the seeing, as we all are here.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the good thing about being an analyst as a profession as well, is because we can still do our job now. And also, I always like that you can do it until you're like very, very old. Like a lot of people stay doing it way past like retirement age, and all the way till the end. And it's really nice because you don't, or your level of ability, you don't have to walk around. So there's a lot of great reasons, just like logistically, in that way.
Oh, my control analyst said the same thing. Even at one point, I was saying something about my own IRA or 401k, I forget what it was, and she says, "What are you talking about? This is our retirement fund." It's you can't outgrow it.
What kind of training did you do?
So I had discovered my analyst, as I think a lot of people who go in through their own, was from a school called the Center for Modern Psychoanalytic Studies here in New York. And when I went to start training, and I went into they were down on 10th Street in the Village in New York.
I love that place.
Yeah, it's a great street. I went and I'm reading the brochure. Here's what you need to do to train. And of course, at this point, I'm a waiter. I'm like, oh, good. I can just schedule my shifts and do it. And I got to the last bit when it says requirement for finally being certified. This is pre-licensure. Was a pre-existing degree, in a master's degree in a related field, social work, nursing. And I went, I don't have a master's degree. And they said, oh, well, no, you get that in Boston. And this is when I knew I wanted to do it. I was living in New York, and I agreed to commute to Boston for 2 years because there was the sister school, the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis, offered a master's degree in psychoanalysis. And that's all I was interested in. I didn't want to get a degree in social work to be able to do it. I was in for one thing. So I did the master's in Boston, and then, the certificate and licensure work in New York.
How great it is that program is set up.
It's really, and now they have it in New York. It's Boston Graduate School, but New York campus. So it's still through the state of Massachusetts. They have it in New York and New Jersey. So, yeah, I was very, 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 very fortunate to go into the program that way. And then what's interesting is my mind goes to the group that you and I met through, the Das Unbehagen, because it wasn't until I graduated that I found it. And, my experience in the modern school is you are with your tribe You read your tribe, you read modern analysts, you read who they say to read, Winnicott, what have you, which is superb. And then I get out and I join this online Das Unbehagen forum, and there's all kinds of conversations about theories I had never considered, authors I'd never read, so I considered it my post-graduation education.
That's great, and that's one of the main reasons we set it up, was because we wanted there's so many different schools in New York, and nobody was talking to each other. It's like everyone was in their little camp, and we were like, all of you are so great. Wouldn't it be great if like all of you were having a conversation? You know?
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, because it sort of faded, I had forgotten about this until just now, that it was obviously a very lively group and different ideas and sometimes contentious, but it never got, in a sense, destructive or at one point mean, not necessarily cruel, until the trans threads. And people just, I found it very, very bizarre that people got very attacking during that time. I thought it was very sad.
Yeah, that's the only time we've had to take someone off.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were like, before we were just trying to be open to everyone's ideas and, you know, let people kind of hash it out with their like arguments or debates or whatever, and just, you know, let it live its own life. And we didn't want to start like having like certain people be able to make decisions about what people could say or who could say what. But that was just like, you know, that point's like a civil rights issue, and you can't be talking negatively about trans people in that derogatory, bigoted way. So
yeah.
I had to just take two people off after that.
But the way I was able to understand it for myself is that it was, in a sense, a group. And even an analytic group, if you have someone who's intent on destroying the group, the analyst can throw them out. You can ask someone to leave a group if they're intent on destroying the group or creating a subgroup that's going to destroy.
Yeah, exactly. And we had like, I had a few like personal negative attacks at me for trying to like stop the negativity. Oh my God. So it's just like, somebody has to moderate this, you know.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. I was fortunate. No one attacked me. So, but I enjoyed it, and obviously I've met you and so many people, and gone to talks, and really it's just been, I think it's a superb community, although somewhat dormant now. But really,
well, everything's dormant now.
Well,
but
yeah.
In recent years, yeah. We're looking forward. We're supposed to have this international conference in July in Copenhagen, because I wanted the psychoanalytic scene in Stockholm is not too huge, and the people I've met are mostly not into people working outside the APA, I'll say. So the only people I've met that are like more Lacanian or okay with people working outside of the IPA are in Gothenburg, which is like 3 hours away from Stockholm. But I wanted like them and like some people in Denmark that I've met, and like other people from Europe to come over and kind of merge with the New Yorkers and have everyone get together and see what happens. But I don't know, that doesn't seem like that's going to happen now, but we'll see.
When was it scheduled for?
It's in the end of July. We'll see.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, we
just have to take it day by day at this point, I think.
Yeah, I think, that's right. That's right. And I think what's so interesting is that we're a community of people that enjoy, in a sense, intimate involvement in the lives of others, no matter what our theoretical orientation. And the request to distance and be separate is very strange. Very strange.
Yeah, one of my friends that's in New York said that it's really hard to like, when she had to like take her kids out just because they need to be outside for a minute and like walk around the block, like being so afraid of other people and like wanting to stay away from everyone. It's like a really horrible feeling.
Yeah. Our building, I live in a we live in a large apartment complex in Chelsea. It's huge, and they have signs that said if the elevator comes and there's someone on it that you don't know that's not part of your circle, don't get on. Just wait for the next one. You know. So a brave new world, strange new world. I'm not sure what sort of world it is. But you know, hopefully hopefully it cracks things open for something new.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's been noted, all of these kind of systemic issues have been issues for a very, very long time, and the election kind of brought most of it to light, and now this is like bringing all of it clearly to light. So something needs to change.
Yeah, and it's also with everybody, you know, with all of our cases, all of my cases now have a common denominator. Watching people's reactions to it, and so a lot of them are surprised. You know, if you said, "Oh, there's going to be a global pandemic, and this is what's going to happen," you know, what would you feel? And people would predict, I think, all kinds of things. And it's, I have a number of people who are surprised themselves in the calm that they feel, the break in their life that's been thrust upon them, that they're like, oh, this is, I can do something with this. It's been surprising, really surprising.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people saying that they're much calmer than they expected themselves to be.
Yeah.
Maybe even feeling a little bit detached or dissociated.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of, my mind is of course going to different cases and what it's happened. And then what was interesting is the word that was coming to my mind, which has been really dominant now for a while, is my mind was drifting to my cases, and I read the LaPlanche, the Unconscious in Translation books that Jonathan House and others did. They're so, I mean, they're just really so rich. And in the Freud and the Sexual, and he talks about, I'd never heard this before, that Lacan interpreting drive as drift. And that word drift it shows up everywhere now, and I have been consciously and unconsciously meditating on it because it opens up so much in a way that drive maybe did the first time I heard the term drive and started thinking about them. But the way that drift is frequently not welcome, right? Couples drift apart. You hear, you know, in crime novels, someone's murdered by a drifter. You don't hear, how'd you meet? Oh, he was a drifter and we got married. You just, the term drift, to me, the motion that it is so non-specific about, and I was recently talking to an author, and the idea of just drift, and that word and the idea of just drifting, and a number of authors, the LaPlanche book, Barnaby Barrett comes to mind, some others, that they're, at least in the past 5 years, a lot of people are writing about the return to the fundamental rule: just talk, just drift. And so it's really, I found it a very helpful term.
It also catches that sense of something like slipping through your fingers to me. Like it's drifting and you can't quite, it feels like it's drifting away and you can't quite grasp it.
Right. And that takes me right back to Barrett, who said, I thought really lovely, he says, you know, we fight, we don't want to make sense. We don't want to grasp. Let it go. Don't grasp. And how evocative of a word it is, and also how, in a sense, pragmatic to say to an analysand, hey, free associate. That just, it's like telling someone to relax. It's just not going to happen. But to invite someone to just drift, there is the pleasurable to it, being on an ocean drifting. It seems to be a helpful invitation in the work, and a way of conceptualizing the work. So really, that's.
I love that book, Freud and the Sexual. I use it so much and read it so much. It's so good.
It is so good. So good. And it's one of those books where you'll read a sentence and the statement in the sentence is so powerful that I will just stop and go, well, I'm going to meditate on that for 3 days. It just, it's so incredible and so clear and approachable.
Yeah, the translations they've done is so good because all the translations are so clear.
Yeah. Yeah, and I read very little Laplanche when I trained. Some, but not. It wasn't a dominant author, and to be exposed, especially through that book, I mean, it's really, really remarkable, and it's also, I think, for me, one of those books in his writing that really, as a clinician, it's almost his writing and his ideas of ways to think about the work and what we're doing is like a sharpening stone, and you're just rubbing yourself against it. It's just a great way to help keep you, at least me, current, present, in the room and working. It's really, I think it's just remarkable.
Who are some modern analysts to read?
Well, the ones who published the most were Dr. Phyllis Meadow and Heinz Spotnitz. So Dr. Spotnitz is the one who, in a sense, coins the term modern psychoanalysis in the 50s. He was at New York Psychoanalytic, managed to get himself thrown out, so he starts his own thing, his own school. His probably signature book is called Modern Psychoanalysis of the Schizophrenic Patient. That's 1969. It's been republished since. And the idea that schizophrenia was pathologically reversible, the real primitive pre-Oedipal states were suitable for analysis. So he starts it, but I would say Phyllis Meadow, who founded the center both in New York and in Boston, her writing is clearer, and he's a very good writer, but he writes almost like it's like a cookbook. Oh, you do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. The concepts are very good. He obviously started an entire school of thought. But I say Dr. Phyllis Meadow would be the one. Her last book was called The New Psychoanalysis, 2004, and it has the same effect for me as the Laplanche book, because it's her distillation of years of thought into a book that is dense. Dense in the fact that the sentences are so well crafted that they contain a lot. I mean, she's been editing, over the years. It's a very, very good book. I would say Meadow and Spotnitz are the big ones, and then others that only published in our journal. We're sort of famous for just staying within ourselves. We publish in our journal, but very few are published, with Routledge or any other places that you would find it. And I think that's been our, to our detriment, because we have ideas that just weren't shared to be agreed with or disagreed with. They just weren't out there to have any a commentary or challenge.
Well, just that aspect that you mentioned is so important. I think you mentioned Molly Merson's podcast, and I think we talked about that, is that this idea that, people aren't analyzable, that really drives me insane.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's so relevant today, I think, because I think more and more people are realizing that all these kinds of pathologizing structures are really, all part of the same grand system that is being uprooted and needs to really change.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. I was trying to remember, and I found it here. Dr. Meadow has she says a lot of one of my favorite quotes is, she says, "We know there is an unconscious. Don't worry about being a Freudian. Don't worry about using the term psychoanalysis. Worry if you ever use the term unconscious. Nobody wants one." And Laplanche says the same thing in Freud and the Sexual, which is that how humiliating to discover something so other inside yourself. And I think that, the Molly, that interview was just superb, and I wrote to her as well, because it was just so rich, and the unanalyzable. And that's another thing that I've noticed over the past, I say 5 or 10 years. I have no sense of time. I just read, I take an idea, and then I enjoy it. That interpretation now, if not under attack, it's being said, hey, wait a minute, there's so much else going on. I just interviewed Bruce Reese. He's got a new book out where it's all about, I think he says, the monsters, madness, and other things that happen inside a session that aren't interpretation. He doesn't throw interpretation out, but that's not what that book is about. But this idea of who qualifies to be analyzed, and also who qualifies, to be an analyst. I know that there were, and maybe still are, but certainly when I first started training, the idea that the non-medicalized should not be analysts. And I know that fight's been going on forever.
Since 1926.
Since 1926, exactly. And I always wonder why a question of lay analysis didn't put that to rest. I always wonder, if that hadn't been published, I could get the argument. I'm always wondering why that didn't just put it to rest. But it didn't. It didn't.
People just love to exclude people so that they can be on top.
Yeah. Oh, my God. One of the training analysts at CMPS, somebody was talking about exclusive, like a club or, exclusive, whatever it was. And he said exclusivity is the provenance of the death drive. And I wrote it down. I went, oh, yeah, that's true. And then I had that moment where I'm like, well, wait a minute. Why is that true? And so I wrote him. I said, explain what you meant by that. And he goes, I just think it's true. He goes, I haven't given it any thought. He just said it. It felt like it was true, and we went with it.
Yeah, but it's just continually like blocking things into smaller and smaller and smaller, like fragments. It's like fragmenting things and isolating from other things and cutting things off. That is all death drive. It's like inertia instead of like allowing things to flow and like opening things up, opening up possibilities, opening up with questions. It's like locking everything down.
Yeah. And that, I would think, modern psychoanalysis has its phrase, which is, it's all grist for the mill. It's all grist for the mill. And it's a shame that Meadow has passed, because she said something near the end of her life that I never got to explore. And she said, the final resistance is confidentiality. And I'm like, oh, that's very fascinating. I don't know what she meant by that, and we can explore it. But the opening up and the curiosity, one of my favorite thinkers, so I got to hear speak here in New York in 2004, was Andre Green. His conference, if I could say that's if I just said you get to pick 24 hours that trained you, it would be that conference. And in the Q&A, somebody asked him, what are you up to? What are your goals? What are your aims for treatment? And he says, I have no aim whatsoever. I'm simply trying to open up a closed structure.
Exactly.
Oh my God. I really, and it was interesting because he was assigned to read, and I found him challenging to read before I met him. Once I met him and heard him speak, okay, got it. And he's another one that I just keep going back to and spending time with.
Yeah, that's a great person to read now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of his books. I haven't read them, and I think I read them in about 8 years ago. I'll have to revisit.
Yeah. Well, he's very, obviously, deep thinker, well-researched approaches, but you find, or I find, incredible humanity. He talks about, what the analyst should be, open, receptive, and all this other stuff. And he said, well, that's wonderfully idealistic, but who can accomplish this? He's very, it's not as, I say, front and center as Winnicott, but there's a very gentle, good enough analyst, in the writing, as well as, of course, very clear thought. I think he's just superb.
Yes, so you interview for New Books on in the psychoanalysis.
I do.
Why don't you talk about that? It's the best.
Well,
that's what I listen to when I'm at the gym, or when I used to go to the gym.
Well, I do. I got Tracy Morgan, who's the editor for the Psychoanalytic Channel. She and I studied together at CMPS, and she invited me to join, and I was happy to do it. And the first book that I did is still one of the most amazing books I ever read. An analyst in New York, a woman, she's mid-80s, and friend of ours, friend of the family. And she says, "Oh, I've published my memoir, and I want you to read it." And I said, "Okay." And I'll admit, it was self-published. And I went, oh, God, self-published. And I had all prejudiced against that. If this isn't, Farrar, Straus, Giroux, I don't want to read it. I got very much on my exclusive high horse. But she's a friend. So I picked up the book. It's called I Should Have Been Music. And she was institutionalized in New York. She tried to kill herself at Vassar in 1957. And it's her story of going through the system as a patient. I read it in 2 days. It's one of the best things I've ever read. And what's amazing is she's writing as a patient. She has the primary process notes, the actual doctor's notes she got from when she was at the hospital. And what's amazing, you read her. She's also a very good writer. She teaches writing, I think, at the New School. Superb writer. You have her journal entries, and you have what she was experiencing as a patient, and you read it, and it's incredibly visceral. It's very hard to read. Her description of going for insulin coma therapy is so harrowing that I had to stop. I said, I can't go down the hall with you. I can't. You're with her. It's brutal, really brutal. But you read that, and then you read the doctor's notes, and they're so far off. And I went, oh my God, I have written process notes like this. I've written them. They have nothing to do with the case at all. And she's beautiful writing. She said they were trying to flatten me into their book of cures. I mean, it's just beautiful stuff. So that was my first interview for New Books, and I was really, really pleased to do it. And I consider her book to be essential because it made me a better clinician. I would read it, and it would open me up in the way a great yoga class or anything will just open you up. And I found myself, higher levels of compassion, higher levels of empathy, higher attunement to listening with my cases after I read it. And I read it, 4 times. And then Bruce Reese is my next interview, and then I'm going to be interviewing a modern analyst on Wednesday.
Nice.
So, I enjoyed doing it. It's very interesting to me because the podcast, it's called New Books in Psychoanalysis. You've been on, and it's about a new book and an author. and I've seen interviews where the book and the author, in a sense, get left as the interviewer and the author will go off into, meta-theoretical discussions, which are kind of interesting, but the book gets lost. And you'll have each of their, people associating to what they read, but the ones that I really like keep the book, front and center, because the listening audience hasn't read the book. And so I think for me, it's very important to keep the book, front and center.
Yeah, I mean, my experience, Tracy's great, and she read that book so thoroughly, she remembered things that I didn't remember,
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, yeah, that is in there.
Oh, yeah, I did write that. Well, it's kind of like if you've ever been to the theater when they have the talk back afterwards and someone raises their hand and asks the actor about a choice and they've got all this history because they know about the material, and the actor's like, I have no idea what you're asking me, the reader being, in a sense, more thorough. So, yeah. Well, Tracy's, she's sort of the gold standard for interviews for all of us, yeah.
Fun.
It is fun.
Well, you have to send me links to this woman's book and then the Modern Analysts so that I can link it to the show.
Oh, sure. We would love that. We would love that. Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody, Romy Redding and Billy Pivnik at NYU Postdoc are starting. We're supposed to launch their podcast during the Div 39 meeting, which obviously got canceled. So.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be in New York right now because the meeting was this past weekend, or was supposed to be.
Yeah.
I was supposed to fly in on Friday the 13th, and I think the meeting got canceled, the conference got canceled on Monday, and then we still had, because my husband makes films and books and things, and he had like a film festival this weekend in New York that he was like, they were showing like 5 of his films over the weekend, and we had a book launch event with our friends. That's the book that our friend and my husband did together. That was supposed to be Thursday. And so after the conference got canceled, we thought, oh, we'll still go because of all these other events we have going on. And then the next day we were like, I don't know. Our friend that my husband had the book with was like 70. And we're like, she's really kind of ill already and was already like just in chemo. And we're like, probably we should cancel that. And then I was like, I don't want to see my parents either because, they're older too. And we were just like, forget it. We should just cancel everything. So we canceled everything, I think, Wednesday. And then later that day, they announced that we couldn't fly there anyway. They said that Europeans would be banned of flying in starting Friday the 13th, which is when we were supposed to leave. So I'm just glad that we hadn't planned our trip a few days earlier and then we're there and couldn't get home, it'd be even worse. So
yeah,
better be stuck at home.
I think so. I think so. I have a friend who's stuck in Berlin, I think, and very anxiety
you can
producing.
only be in with one other person. They've locked it down so that it's only 2 people at a time now.
Oh, God. Yeah.
It's rough.
Yeah, and I think at least for me, this is the first time in my lifetime I've confronted everything global. Somebody on TV said this is our World War II moment, and I think that's somewhat accurate, that the whole world is now confronting something.
Yeah, and also we've never been connected so much like this before, all at one time through the internet. So it's everybody's getting the same information immediately at the same time, all the time, all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely unusual in human history.
Right. Yeah, connected while we're being asked to disconnect.
Right. But it's been nice in the way that a few people, different groups that I know, have had kind of little meetings about like yesterday a few analysts like called and they were like, can we all just talk and like kind of process what's going on with our practice and stuff like that. And then another kind of community that I'm a part of did the same sort of thing over the weekend. Everybody just kind of, you know, checked in with each other. So that's really nice to see like the various communities kind of checking in and seeing how everyone's doing and processing and talking about meeting again every couple of weeks or something.
Oh yeah, and the videos coming out of Italy with, you know, people singing at the balcony, and I think it was Spain where they applaud the nurses and hospital workers at the end of every shift. That sort of stuff is really, really beautiful. But I saw some tenor, I forget his name. I love opera, but he sang Nessun Dorma to Florence, and it was at sunset. It was just really magical. The freedom of your podcast to just, in a sense, just talk and drift is really, I don't know, it's just special.
Yeah, I like it. I think I actually started it because when I was moving, you know, I was so used to being so busy, you know, working in an office in New York, seeing like 10, 12 people a day, every day, you know, and the commute and everything else. I was used to like really long, busy days. And then all of a sudden I just had like a few phone session analyses, and like, you know, instead of seeing 10 hours a day, I was seeing like 10 hours a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was just like needing something to do. And I had done this book, Rendering Unconscious, which was like a bunch of people from Unbehagen like contributing writing. And I had edited that, and then I was like, now what do I do? You know? And so actually before that we had done the violence books. I did that, then I did rendering. And I was like, now what do I do? It's like, maybe I could start interviewing people that are in rendering.
Yeah.
And so I just like started a podcast just to kind of keep myself occupied, basically. But it's been really fun, and I've always said about this profession, it's such a privilege to be able to like have people talk to you and like tell you their like innermost thoughts and like how they view the world, and you know, it's really a special experience, and I really appreciate that about it. So I feel like I've kind of filled that in a little bit, that hole, with like talking to different people in the podcast too, so I can like kind of hear what different people's views are about psychoanalysis and what they're doing with it and how they got into it and what their story's like. It's like a similar sort of thing, but in a different way.
Right, and I also think that your podcast allows, if someone stumbles on it that is thinking about psychoanalysis, thinking about that as a treatment that has either never had treatment or it's very welcoming, and because it's a wide range of perspectives, it's like, oh, I could find a home there. You know, people picking where they want to get their therapy from that have nowhere to begin. You know, listening to this, it just is like, okay, I could find a home there, no matter where you're coming from, and that's, I think, the gift.
Yeah, that's what I really want. I want it to be accessible and like used in multiple ways, which it is. And I love hearing how people got into the field, because everyone's kind of journey is so different. And I think that's really helpful too. Like when I was a graduate student, I mean, it was so like occluded, you know, it's like, where are the analysts? Like where do they live? They're all in New York, you know. I was in Florida, you know, so it's like they're all in New York.
And were you a grad student in psychology, or what was your grad work?
I have a PsyD, so yeah, doctorate in psychology. And I had been reading like Freud and Jung. I didn't hear about Lacan until like got to New York, so I was already like 29 or 30 when I heard about Lacan. But when I went to graduate school, I just assumed that like I thought it was going to be more eclectic. Like here's Skinner and here's Pavlov and here's Freud and here's Jung and you know here's Melanie Klein. Like I thought everybody would be talked about, because the way I always saw it was like all these people were coming from different perspectives, and like they all found things that are useful about the human experience. And I never think like one way is the way. That's just like not how I think. So I just thought like everyone's just kind of looking at different aspects of what it's like to be a human. And some of these aspects can be useful for different people, or the same person in different times in their lives. You know, that's how I think. So I kind of just naively assumed that graduate school would be more psychoanalytic than it was. And then when I got there, it was like, there was like nothing. There was 2 analysts that had retired in Florida from New York. And they taught like electives there, like, I guess just to have something to do. So they were my supervisors. So I'm very thankful for them that they were there.
Yeah,
because
that's great.
One was like, in his late 80s, So I'm glad he was still lively and wanted to talk to students.
Listen, I think this discipline keeps us alive sometimes. Yeah, because I think it keeps people alive, and you just keep going.
Yeah, no, it can be very generative, and I think that's why I was so surprised at how like closed off the institutional structures can be. They're not all like that, of course, but how some of them can be like so exclusionary and closed off, because it's just so antithetical to what psychoanalysis is in my experience. In my experience, it's just like opened up all sorts of things and helped me, process things from my childhood that I never would have thought of or remembered otherwise. And all of it's like freed up my energy. You don't realize, I don't think most people realize how much of your energy is being used to kind of keep all of these forces at bay, and old traumas and misunderstandings and just like confusion about what the world is and your body and everything. And it's all still there, and it's all like being repressed. And the more you work through it, the more energy you have to create new things in your life and do things in a better way for yourself, instead of just enacting the same patterns over and over again.
Yeah, well, whenever, it's always that great moment for yourself, but also for cases when they say something new or give themselves permission and go, I can say that. Well, then let me do this, and it's just wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. I think I didn't realize how much you're not given permission to do and say so much in life. There's like so many unspoken rules about how to be and what to say and what's appropriate and all these things that people like censor themselves so much. And the more you start undoing that, the more you just stop caring really about all of those rules.
Whenever we've had it happen a couple of times where a friend who's will come and say, well, I'm going to quit my therapist, and they'll tell me why, and I'll say, well, why don't you share that idea, which is usually a critique of the therapist. Why don't you talk about that? I'm like, well, I can never talk about that. The idea that they in their mind have decided there's still something off limits, and when you realize there's nothing off limits, it's like, oh, this is an enormous amount of fun. Yeah,
there's real freedom in that. And that's very true. Like being able to say to the person you're talking to what you really think, including about them.
Right.
That's always a real shift in the treatment. It's like, just say it. What do you think about me? What don't you like?
Well, somebody once said that analysis begins when the analyst becomes the problem.
Right.
Which is pithy and funny, but also a little bit true.
Kind of true, yeah.
Good. Well, this has been great.
It was really fun.
Yeah. Well, you said it would be fun. I believed you.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Christopher Russell, a psychoanalyst in Chelsea, Manhattan, and host on the podcast New Books in Psychoanalysis. Links to the Center for Modern Psychoanalytic Studies in New York, as well as to the work of Phyllis Meadow, Hyman Spotnitz, and Babette Baker, can all be found in the text accompanying this episode. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. Published by Trapart Books, 2019, and also available as an ebook through iBooks and Kindle. For more information, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. And now, Death Disco Scan, a song from the upcoming album by Douglas Lucas and I called Sound 23. The task of the right eye is to peer into the telescope, production that permeated daily life and were affecting the artistic domain as well. Modern world to mechanization, pace and noise, and to the possibilities of industrial. Towards it, we're more ambivalent. Artists were responding to the rapid changes indeed. The poem will resemble you. Copy conscientiously in the order in which they left the bag. Next, take out each cutting one after another. Leadership and geography. The Dada movement was notably diffuse, with several active cities, contrast to surrealism, for example, which, as we will see, remained centralized in terms of art was pioneering in the breakdown of barriers between applied and fine art. Cover art collaborated not only with Dadaists, but with also constructivists and concrete artists. Her work having an impact on the development of minimalism and serial art as and reassembling them, tracing her geometric words, reliefs, ink on paper, and commissioning woven work based on her patterns. And content was typical of Dada performance and experiments as the artist set out to create an unsettling effect in the audience. At the heart of Dada lay the gratuitous act, the paradoxical, spontaneous gesture aimed at revealing the inconsistency and inanity of. Dada questions society's accepted values and consensus worldview, challenging the status quo while embracing new ways of thinking, utilizing new materials and methods, submissions to be collected together in an anthology and printed in a run of 10,000. Contributors to submit portraits of themselves as well as photographs of their artwork, published until 1921. Zara conceived of the idea of Dada Globe and sent out invitations for Macabia and the pair to the city by storm. They organized the journal Dada, which was